The night Vincent proposed to Sarah Edward, everyone thought it was love. But the truth is, she had already saved his life, and she didn't even remember him. Before we go any further, answer this honestly. If someone changed your life completely, paid your bills, protected you, opened doors for you, without ever telling you, would you feel grateful, or would you feel like your life was never really yours? Think about that, because by the end of this story, you might not have the same answer, and if you enjoy stories that make you feel something real, go ahead and subscribe, because this one is not going where you expect. The restaurant carried the kind of silence money could buy, not the absence of sound, but the control of it. Conversations stayed low, laughter was measured, even the clinking of glasses felt rehearsed. Everything in the room had a place, a rhythm, a purpose. Everything except Sarah Edward. She moved through the space with quiet precision, her steps light, her posture straight, her expression calm. Her blue and white checked uniform was crisp, tailored just enough to look refined without drawing attention. From a distance, she blended perfectly into the environment. Up close, she disappeared entirely. "Excuse me," a man said without looking at her. She adjusted his glass. No eye contact, no acknowledgement. No thank you. Sarah nodded anyway, even though he wasn't watching. That was the job. To be present without ever being noticed. To exist in a space where people saw service, not the person giving it. At the center of the room sat Nora. She didn't raise her voice, but attention leaned toward her naturally. People listened when she spoke, laughed a little quicker at her words, held her gaze a little longer than necessary. Her white gown was simple in a way that only expensive things could be. It didn't try to impress. It didn't need to. Sarah approached the table carefully, tray balanced in her hand. She had learned how to make herself smaller in moments like this. Less movement, less presence, less space. But just as she reached the table, something shifted. It wasn't loud, it wasn't obvious. It was the kind of change you felt before you understood. Conversations didn't stop, they faltered, like a room inhaling and forgetting to exhale. Sarah glanced up. The doors had opened. He walked in without urgency, without performance, but everything adjusted around him anyway. Vincent didn't demand attention. He carried the kind of presence that made attention inevitable. Heads turned in quiet waves. Conversations dimmed. Even Nora paused mid-sentence. Sarah felt something unfamiliar settle in her chest as her eyes met him for the first time. Not fear, not curiosity. Something quieter. Something that felt like recognition without a memory attached to it. She looked away quickly, because whatever that feeling was, it didn't belong to her world. "Table 1. The manager whispered behind her. "Now." Of course. She steadied herself and moved forward again, each step controlled, even though something inside her wasn't. The closer she got, the stronger that strange feeling became. Not familiarity. Not exactly. Just something unfinished. Vincent was already seated when she arrived. He didn't scan the room or acknowledge the attention he had drawn. He simply sat there, composed, as if he had already seen everything he needed to see. Sarah stopped beside him. "Good evening," she said softly. He looked up, and in that single moment, something shifted. His gaze settled on her with quiet certainty. Not surprise, not curiosity, recognition, like he had been expecting her. Sarah felt it instantly. That uncomfortable awareness of being seen, not as a server, not as background, but as someone specific. She looked away first. "Your order, sir?" she asked, steadying her voice. Vincent didn't answer immediately. His eyes remained on her, not invasive, not inappropriate, just intentional. And somehow that made it worse. Across the table, Nora noticed. Her eyes moved from Vincent to Sarah, then back again. A small smile formed, controlled and deliberate. "You're new," Nora said. Sarah blinked slightly. "No, Mom." Nora tilted her head. "Strange. I don't remember you." It wasn't a question. It was a quiet dismissal. "That's all right," Sarah replied calmly. A few people at the table exchanged amused looks. It was subtle but present, the kind of moment meant to remind someone of their place. Sarah didn't react. She had learned not to, but Vincent noticed the way she didn't shrink, the way she didn't respond, the way she held her ground without making a scene. It stayed with him. "Water," he said finally. Sarah nodded and reached forward, pouring with steady hands, but before she could finish, he spoke again. "Sarah." Her hand paused, just slightly, enough to break the rhythm. She looked at him, confusion flickering across her face. She hadn't told him her name. "Sir?" she asked carefully. Vincent met her gaze. "Thank you." Nothing more, no explanation. But the moment lingered, because now something was wrong. She finished pouring and stepped back, her movements controlled, but her thoughts were not. How did he know her name? Nora noticed that too. Her expression changed, not dramatically but enough to show that something no longer made sense. Sarah turned to leave. That was what she always did. Enter, serve, disappear. But before she could take a full step, Vincent spoke again. "Stay." It wasn't loud. It didn't need to be. Sarah froze. Stay meant stepping out of invisibility. Stay meant being part of the moment instead of passing through it. Stay meant attention. Her fingers tightened slightly around the tray before she turned back to face him. "Is there something else you need, sir?" she asked. Her voice remained professional, but something underneath it had shifted. Vincent looked at her, steady and composed, as if this moment had been waiting for him. And in a way it had. Because this quiet disruption, this subtle break in her carefully controlled world, this was where everything began to change. Sarah didn't know it yet, but the life she believed she had built on her own was about to be questioned in ways she could not imagine. And deep inside her, that strange feeling returned. Stronger now, closer, like something trying to be remembered, but she still couldn't place it. Not yet. Vincent, however, already knew. He had always known. She just hadn't remembered him. Yet. Vincent did not repeat himself. He didn't need to. "Stay." The word settled into the space between them, quiet but immovable. Sarah felt it more than she heard it. For a brief second she considered pretending she hadn't. It would have been easy, safer. Just a small nod, a polite smile, and she could step away like she always did. Invisible again. But something in his tone made that impossible, so she stayed. Not fully, not comfortably, just enough to obey without surrendering control. Her body remained angled slightly away, as if ready to leave at any moment, but her presence lingered. Vincent noticed that too. Of course he did. "Do you still take your tea without sugar?" he asked. The question landed softly. But it didn't belong in this moment. Sarah blinked, caught off guard. "I'm sorry?" Vincent's gaze didn't shift. "Tea, you don't like it sweet." It wasn't phrased as a question this time. It was a statement. And that was worse. A small crease formed between Sarah's brows. "I think you're mistaken, sir." "I'm not." He said it gently, calmly, without pressure. But the certainty in his voice unsettled her more than if he had insisted loudly. Across the table, Nora leaned forward slightly, her interest sharpening. "This is interesting," she said, her tone light but edged with something else. You've never spoken to her before, have you? Vincent didn't look at her. No. Nora's smile widened, but it didn't reach her eyes. And yet you seem to know quite a lot about her. Sarah felt the attention shift again. Not the quiet, controlled kind from earlier, but something more focused. Curious, probing. She didn't like it. Would you like me to bring anything else? She asked, directing the question back to Vincent, trying to restore structure to a moment that was slipping away from her. Vincent studied her for a second longer, then gave a small nod. Not yet. That should have been her cue to leave, but he didn't dismiss her, and she didn't move. The silence stretched, thin and delicate. Nora broke it first. You're making her uncomfortable, she said casually, lifting her glass. Let her go. It sounded like kindness. It wasn't, it was control. Sarah felt it immediately, the subtle shift of power being reclaimed. Nora wasn't helping her. She was repositioning the moment. Vincent finally turned his head, just slightly, acknowledging Nora without fully engaging her. She can leave if she wants to, he said. Then his eyes returned to Sarah. But she won't. It wasn't arrogance, it wasn't a challenge, it was certainty, and that unsettled her more than anything else. Sarah exhaled slowly, steadying herself. Sir, I have other tables to attend to. Vincent nodded once. You do? But still he didn't look away. Something in his expression changed, not visibly, not in a way anyone else would notice, but enough for her to feel it. A quiet patience, like he wasn't trying to hold her there anymore, like he didn't need to, and somehow that made it harder to leave. She turned and walked away. Not rushed, not shaken, just deliberate. But the moment followed her. At the service station, Sarah placed the tray down carefully, her fingers lingering on the edge longer than necessary. Her heartbeat hadn't settled. Not because of him. At least that's what she told herself. Because of the situation. The attention. The disruption. That was all. Are you all right? Another waitress asked quietly beside her. Sarah nodded. Yes. You look like you've seen something. She almost smiled. I haven't. But even as she said it, her mind replayed the moment. The way he said her name. The way he looked at her. Not like someone seeing her for the first time, but like someone confirming something. She didn't like that, because there was only one explanation that made sense, and it didn't feel possible. Back at the table, Nora had gone quiet. Not outwardly. She still held herself the same way, still carried her composure with ease. But inside, something had shifted. She didn't like variables, and Sarah had just become one. You're distracted, Nora said lightly, her eyes still on Vincent. I'm not. You are. Vincent didn't respond. Nora leaned back, studying him more carefully now. You never repeat yourself. But tonight, you did. Vincent reached for his glass. Did I? You asked her to stay. That's not repetition. Nora smiled faintly. No, that's interest. A pause. Should I be concerned? Vincent set the glass down without a sound. About what? Nora held his gaze. About her. For the first time since he entered the room, Vincent allowed a small shift in his expression. Not irritation, not amusement, something quieter. You don't need to be concerned, he said. Nora's eyes narrowed slightly. That's not reassuring. It's not meant to be. The honesty in his response landed harder than if he had avoided the question, and Nora felt it. That subtle, unfamiliar discomfort. Because Vincent didn't play games, and when he chose to say something directly, it usually meant the situation had already moved beyond control. Across the room, Sarah picked up another tray. Her movements had returned to normal, controlled, efficient, invisible. But something inside her hadn't settled. She found herself glancing towards the table again, just once, then quickly looking away. But it was enough, because Vincent saw it, and he smiled, not outwardly, not in a way anyone else would notice. But something in his eyes shifted, a quiet confirmation. The next time Sarah approached the table, she was more careful, more aware, more guarded. "Your wine," she said, placing the glass gently in front of Nora. Nora didn't thank her. She simply watched her, closely. "You've worked here long?" Nora asked. "A while." "How long is a while?" Sarah hesitated briefly. "Long enough." Nora tilted her head slightly, as if trying to solve something. "You're not from here." It wasn't a question. "No, ma'am." "Where then?" Sarah met her gaze this time. Calm. Steady. "Nigeria." Nora nodded slowly. "I thought so." There was no insult in her tone, but there was no warmth either, just observation. Then her eyes flicked briefly to Vincent, and back. Something unspoken passed through her expression, something calculating. Vincent spoke again. "Do you still walk home after your shift?" Sarah froze. It was subtle, almost invisible. But this time, it wasn't confusion. It was something closer to alarm. She turned to him fully now. "Excuse me?" "You walk," he repeated, instead of taking a car. It wasn't a guess. It wasn't curiosity. It was knowledge. And suddenly, the air felt different. "He shouldn't know that," she said quietly. It wasn't directed at him. It was directed at the moment, at the reality that something no longer made sense. Vincent held her gaze. "You shouldn't do that anymore." The statement was simple, but the meaning behind it wasn't. Sarah's expression shifted. Not fear, not anger. Something more complicated. "You don't get to tell me what I should or shouldn't do," she said. Her voice wasn't loud, but it was firm. And for the first time, there was a line, clear, defined. Vincent nodded slowly. "I know." And he did. That was the problem. Nora watched the exchange carefully. Every word, every shift, every pause. And now, she understood something. Not everything, but enough. This wasn't random. This wasn't sudden. This wasn't interest. This was history, and she had not been part of it. Sarah stepped back. This time, she didn't wait. "Enjoy your evening," she said, her tone returning to neutral, and she walked away. Not because she was dismissed, but because she chose to leave. Vincent didn't stop her. Not this time, because he knew something she didn't. This wasn't about holding her in place. It was about timing, and the moment, the real moment, hadn't come yet. But Sarah felt it, that quiet shift in her world, like something had been slightly moved out of place, not enough to break anything, but enough that nothing fit the same way anymore. And for the first time that night, she didn't feel invisible. And she wasn't sure if that was a good thing. If you've ever felt like life was finally starting to work out for you, like things were falling into place after years of struggling, pause for a second and ask yourself this: what if it wasn't random? What if someone had been quietly standing behind your life, adjusting things just enough so you wouldn't fall? And if you were, Sarah, would you want to know? If stories like this make you think a little deeper, stay with me and subscribe now, because what's about to unfold will change the way you see everything that's happened to her so far. Sarah didn't return to the table immediately, not because she couldn't, but because something inside her refused to move in that direction again. She stayed near the service station longer than necessary, pretending to reorganize what didn't need organizing. Glasses were already aligned, napkins already folded, orders already clear. Still, she adjusted them again, And again, because movement felt safer than stillness. Stillness made room for thoughts. And right now, her thoughts were loud. He shouldn't know that. The words replayed in her mind, clearer now than when she said them. Not just her name, not just the tea, but the walking. That wasn't something you guessed. That wasn't something you observed from a distance. That was personal. Her fingers paused mid-motion. There were only two possibilities. Either this was coincidence stacked too perfectly, or... She stopped herself. No. That didn't make sense. It couldn't. She would have remembered him. She had to. Across the room, Vincent hadn't moved much. He didn't need to. From where he sat, he could see her clearly. Not just her position, her behavior, the way she stayed close to the service station, the unnecessary adjustments, the stillness between movements. He recognized it immediately. Not confusion, not fear, processing. She was trying to make sense of something that didn't fit. And he let her because forcing clarity too early would break the moment, and this moment mattered, more than she knew. Nora followed his gaze. She didn't turn her head. She didn't need to. "You're watching her again," she said quietly. Vincent didn't deny it. "That's becoming a pattern?" Vincent picked up his glass, taking a slow sip before setting it down. Patterns are only noticeable when someone is looking for them. Nora smiled faintly. "I always look." That much was true, and it was why she had survived in the world she came from. But tonight, something about that confidence felt slightly misplaced, because for the first time in a long time, she wasn't ahead of the situation. Sarah finally moved, not toward them, but toward another table, work, routine, something she could control. She took an order, nodded, turned, walked, delivered, every movement precise, every step intentional. From the outside, nothing had changed. But inside, everything had shifted. She became aware of things she had never questioned before. The way her rent had been raised, then suddenly reduced again. The time her visa extension was approved faster than expected. The hospital bill she thought had been delayed, but somehow cleared. At the time she had called it luck. Now, it didn't feel like luck. "Sarah," the voice came from behind her, not Vincent, her manager. "Table 1 requested you." Her chest tightened slightly. Requested. That word carried weight. She nodded. "I'll be there." The walk back felt different this time, not because of the distance, but because she was no longer walking into a normal interaction. She was walking into something unresolved, something that had already started without her. When she reached the table, Vincent was already looking at her, not waiting, not expecting, just present. "You called for me, sir." Her tone was controlled, careful, but no longer neutral. Vincent noticed. "Sit." The word landed softly, but firmly. Sarah didn't move. "I'm working. I know. Then I can't sit." Vincent nodded slightly, as if he expected that answer. "Then stand." Nora let out a quiet breath, almost amused. "This is new." Sarah remained where she was, not sitting, not leaving, caught between two decisions. Vincent didn't push. He simply opened the space and let her choose. And slowly, she stepped closer. Not fully, but enough. "What do you want?" she asked. Direct, no softness, no avoidance. Vincent leaned back slightly, studying her. Not her face, her resistance. Because that was what mattered now. Not recognition, not yet. Trust had to come first, even if it didn't look like trust. "You're tired," he said. Sarah frowned. "Excuse me?" "You worked double shifts this week." Her expression changed again. This time, there was no hiding it. "How do you know that?" Vincent didn't answer immediately, because this was the moment where things could go wrong. Not dramatically, but permanently. Push too far, and she would pull away completely. Say too little, and the moment would collapse into doubt. So he chose carefully. "I pay attention," he said. It was the truth, just not the full truth. "That's not normal," Sarah replied. "No," Vincent agreed. "It's not." Nora watched them both now, no longer hiding her interest, because whatever this was, it had moved beyond curiosity. Sarah crossed her arms slightly, a subtle shift, a small defense. You don't just pay attention to someone you've never met. Vincent held her gaze. "Are you sure we've never met?" The question landed quietly, but it changed everything. Sarah didn't answer, because for the first time, that possibility felt real, and that was more unsettling than anything else. A memory flickered, not clear, not complete, just rain, cold air, a voice. She shook it off immediately. No, that wasn't enough. That wasn't anything. "You're mistaken," she said, but her voice lacked the certainty it had before. Vincent noticed. Of course he did, and for the first time, he leaned forward slightly, not as a move of power, but as a move of proximity. 3 years ago, he said quietly, Sol wasn't kind to you. Her breath caught, just slightly, but enough. You didn't know anyone. His voice remained calm, steady. You worked nights. You walked home alone. Her heartbeat quickened, because now, this wasn't observation. This was memory. And one night, Vincent continued softly, you didn't walk past. The room felt smaller, quieter, heavier. You stopped. And this time, she didn't interrupt him, because something inside her was listening now, not resisting, not denying, listening. And Vincent knew she was closer than she realized. Not to him, but to the truth. The memory didn't arrive all at once. It came the way rain starts, barely noticeable at first. A drop, then another, then something heavier. Sarah stood still, her fingers tightening slightly around the edge of the table as Vincent's words settled into her. 3 years ago, you didn't walk past. You stopped. She searched his face again, this time not as a stranger, but as someone trying to recognize what her mind hadn't fully given her yet. I've helped a lot of people, she said quietly. It was the safest response, the most logical one, but even as she said it, something in her voice betrayed her, because this didn't feel like a lot of people. This felt specific. Vincent nodded once. You have. He didn't argue, didn't insist, and somehow that made it harder for her to dismiss him. Nora watched the exchange carefully, her fingers resting lightly against her glass. She hadn't interrupted yet, not because she didn't want to, but because she was trying to understand what kind of moment this was becoming. This wasn't flirtation. This wasn't coincidence. This was something else, something she hadn't been invited into. Sarah straightened slightly. Even if what you're saying is true, that doesn't explain this. Her hand moved subtly toward the space between them, the table, the setting, the entire situation. You don't just track someone's life like that. Vincent's expression didn't shift much, but something in his eyes did. Not defensiveness, not guilt, consideration. You're right, he said. The agreement caught her off guard. You don't. A small pause followed. Then he added, not without a reason. The words settled deeper than she expected, because now there was intention, and intention was harder to ignore than coincidence. Sarah exhaled slowly. Then what's the reason? The question was direct, clear, and for the first time since this started, she wasn't trying to escape the moment. She was stepping into it. Vincent leaned back slightly, his fingers resting lightly against the edge of the table. His gaze didn't leave hers. "I was supposed to forget you," he said. The answer wasn't what she expected. Her brows pulled together slightly. "What does that mean?" "It means," Vincent continued calmly, "you were never meant to matter after that night." Silence followed, not awkward, just heavy. Nora's attention sharpened, because now this was no longer about curiosity. This was about significance. Sarah shook her head slightly. "That doesn't make sense." "I know." He didn't try to make it sound clearer, didn't rush to explain. He allowed the confusion to exist, because the truth wasn't something she could accept all at once. Not yet. "You helped someone," Vincent said. "That should have been the end of it." Sarah swallowed slightly. "And it wasn't?" "No." A beat. It wasn't. Something about the way he said it made her chest tighten, not because of fear, but because of weight. Like the answer carried more than the words themselves. "Why?" she asked again, softer this time. Vincent looked at her, not as someone explaining something, but as someone remembering it. "Because you didn't ask anything from me." The simplicity of the statement caught her off guard. "I didn't know you," she replied. "That's exactly the point." He held her gaze. "You didn't know who I was. You didn't ask what happened. You didn't wait for something in return." Sarah's expression softened slightly, but confusion still lingered. "That's just basic human decency." Vincent gave a faint nod. "It should be." A pause. But it isn't. The room felt quieter now, not because people had stopped talking, but because Sarah had. Her thoughts were moving differently now. Not defensive, not dismissive, just searching. "And that made you—" "What?" she asked. "Grateful." Vincent didn't answer immediately, because that word, grateful, was too small. Finally, he said, "It made me aware." "Of what?" "Of how little it takes for someone to matter." The answer landed differently this time. Not confusing, not unsettling, just honest. And that honesty made it harder to push him away. But still, something didn't sit right. Sarah shook her head slightly. "That still doesn't explain everything else." Vincent didn't pretend not to understand what she meant. "The rent," she said quietly. His silence confirmed it. "The hospital bill." Still nothing. "The visa." Now her voice dropped. "That was you too, wasn't it?" Vincent didn't look away. "Yes." The word was soft, but it hit harder than anything he had said before. Sarah took a small step back. Not dramatically, not in fear, just distance. "You had no right," she said. The words came out steadier than she felt. Vincent nodded. "I know." No defense, no justification, just acknowledgement, and somehow that made it worse, because she couldn't argue with him if he wasn't arguing back. "You don't just—" She paused, trying to find the right words. "You don't just step into someone's life like that without them knowing." Vincent's voice remained calm. "I didn't step into it." Sarah looked at him sharply. "I stayed out of it." He continued. "That was the point." "That's not staying out," she replied. "That's control." The word hung between them. Control. Vincent didn't react immediately, because he understood why she said it, and he also understood that this was the moment everything could turn. "You think I controlled your life," he said. I think you interfered with it. Another pause. Then Vincent asked, Did anything I did take something away from you? The question caught her off guard, because it wasn't defensive. It wasn't aggressive. It was precise. Sarah hesitated, because the answer wasn't simple. No, she admitted. Did it stop you from making your own decisions? She hesitated again. No. Vincent nodded slightly. Then what did it do? The question lingered, unanswered, because she knew the answer, even if she didn't want to say it. It made things easier, she said quietly. Vincent didn't respond. He let her continue. It gave me space, she added, to breathe, to think, to not feel like I was constantly catching up. Her voice softened as she spoke, because now she wasn't arguing, she was realizing, and that realization felt complicated. So no, Vincent said gently, I didn't control your life. A pause. I removed the things that were trying to control it. The distinction settled deeply, not as a justification, but as a perspective, and for the first time, Sarah didn't know how to respond, because this wasn't black and white anymore. It wasn't right, but it wasn't wrong either. It was something in between, and that was harder to deal with. Nora finally spoke. Do you hear yourself? She said, her tone calm but edged with disbelief. You're justifying this like it's normal. Vincent turned slightly toward her. I'm not justifying it. Then what are you doing? He met her gaze briefly. Telling the truth. Nora let out a quiet breath, shaking her head slightly. You always do that like it solves everything. It doesn't. Exactly. She looked at Sarah now, her expression shifting, not hostile, but different, more human. You don't owe him anything, Nora said. It wasn't a warning. It wasn't manipulation. It was perspective. And Sarah felt it. Because for the first time, Nora wasn't speaking as someone above her. She was speaking as someone who understood something she didn't. Sarah looked back at Vincent, then at Nora, then down at her own hands, and for the first time since this started, she wasn't reacting. She was choosing. I need to think, she said finally. Her voice was quiet but clear. Vincent nodded. I know. He didn't stop her this time, didn't ask her to stay, didn't hold the moment in place, because this part, this decision, had to belong to her. Sarah turned and walked away. Not quickly, not slowly, just deliberately. And as she moved through the restaurant again, something had changed. Not in the room, not in the people, but in her. Because now, she wasn't invisible. Not to him, not to herself. And that made everything feel different. If you were Sarah in that moment, what would you do? Would you accept what he did as care? Or would you walk away because it felt like too much? And more importantly, would you want to know everything he hasn't told her yet? Because trust me, he still hasn't said the most important part. If you want to see what happens next, make sure you're subscribed, because the next part changes everything. Have you ever had a moment where everything you believed about your life suddenly didn't feel certain anymore? If you have, then stay with this. Because what Sarah is about to discover isn't just about Vincent, it's about her, and the parts of her own story she never questioned. Sarah didn't go back to the service station. She didn't step outside. She didn't leave the restaurant. She just continued moving, but without direction. From the outside, nothing had changed. She still carried trays, still served tables, still responded when called. Her posture remained composed, her steps measured, her expression neutral. But inside, something had shifted. The rhythm she had relied on for so long no longer felt steady. It felt interrupted. The restaurant noise returned around her, but it no longer held her attention. Conversations blurred into background noise. Laughter sounded distant. Even the soft music that once filled the space now felt like something she was hearing for the first time and not recognizing, because her mind wasn't in the room anymore. It was somewhere else, replaying, rebuilding, re-questioning. The rent. She remembered the email clearly, the increase that had made her sit still for almost 10 minutes, calculating, adjusting, trying to make something impossible possible. Then 2 weeks later, a correction, a system error. The price reduced. She had called it luck. The hospital bill. She remembered the weight of it, the quiet panic, the late nights staring at numbers that didn't make sense. Then suddenly, it was cleared. A delay, they said, a processing issue. She had called it grace. The visa. That one had meant everything. The uncertainty, the waiting, the fear of having to leave everything she had built behind. Then, unexpectedly, approved, faster than it should have been, she had called it relief. Now, none of it felt random. Sarah placed a glass down on a table. "Thank you," someone said. This time, she looked at them, not just at the glass, not just at the task, at the person. And for a brief second she wondered, if none of those things had happened, would she still be standing here? Would she still be holding everything together? Or would something have fallen apart long before now? The thought unsettled her, because she didn't know, and for someone who had spent years surviving on certainty, not knowing felt dangerous. Sarah. She turned. Nora. For a moment Sarah considered continuing forward, not out of defiance, but out of exhaustion. She didn't want another conversation, not another layer, not another shift in what she was trying to understand. But Nora's expression stopped her. It wasn't sharp anymore. It wasn't controlled. It was quiet. "I'd like to speak with you," Nora said. No authority, no pressure, just intention. Sarah hesitated briefly, then nodded. They didn't leave the restaurant. They didn't need to. They moved to a quieter corner, still within the same space, still part of the same world, but far enough that their voices didn't blend into everything else. Nora studied her for a moment before speaking. "You're trying to decide if what he did was wrong." It wasn't a question. Sarah didn't respond, because it was true. Nora exhaled softly. "I've known Vincent for a long time," she continued, "long enough to understand how he moves." Sarah crossed her arms slightly. "And how is that?" Nora's gaze didn't waver. "He doesn't do anything halfway." Sarah let out a quiet breath. "That doesn't make this okay." "No," Nora said, and that stopped her, because she expected resistance, justification, something, but not agreement. "It doesn't," Nora repeated, "but it also doesn't make it simple." Silence settled between them. "He doesn't attach easily." Nora continued. "Everything with him is deliberate, thought through, controlled." Sarah looked at her. "And this doesn't feel controlled to you?" Nora paused. "It does," she said, then added more quietly, "just not in the way you think." Sarah frowned slightly. Nora stepped a little closer, lowering her voice. "If this was control, you wouldn't be standing here questioning it." That line stayed, because it didn't sound like defense, it sounded like truth. "You'd feel dependent," Nora continued. "You'd feel like your life only worked because of him, like you couldn't function without whatever he gave you." Sarah's gaze dropped briefly. That wasn't how she felt. She had struggled, worked, endured. Yes, things had become easier. But she hadn't lost herself in the process. Nora watched her carefully. "He didn't make you rely on him," she said. "He made sure you didn't have to rely on anyone." The difference was subtle, but it shifted something. "Why are you telling me this?" Sarah asked. Nora met her gaze. "Because I know what it looks like when Vincent chooses something." A pause. "And this isn't casual?" The words landed deeper than expected. Not loud, not dramatic, just certain. Sarah exhaled slowly. "You were married to him." "Yes, and you're saying this like it doesn't matter." Nora gave a faint, almost tired smile. "It matters. A beat. Just not in the way you think." Sarah studied her more closely now, because for the first time, Nora didn't feel like someone above her. She felt like someone who had already learned something Sarah was just beginning to understand. "What happened between you two?" Sarah asked. Nora didn't answer immediately. When she did, her voice was calm. "We made sense." Sarah blinked. "That's it?" "That's everything." Nora's eyes drifted briefly toward Vincent's table. "We understood each other, respected each other. There was no conflict, no confusion." Her expression softened slightly. "And no depth." That part lingered. "We were aligned." She continued. "But we were never connected." Sarah absorbed that quietly. Because now, this wasn't about rivalry, it was about difference. The difference between something that worked and something that meant something. "Then why did you stay?" Sarah asked. Nora looked at her. "Because I didn't know there was anything else." The answer was simple, but it settled deeply. Because it wasn't just about Nora, it was about anyone who had ever accepted something that felt right, without realizing it wasn't real. Back at the table, Vincent hadn't moved much, but he was aware of where Sarah was, of who she was speaking to, of the shift happening that he couldn't control. And he let it happen, because this part, this understanding, couldn't come from him. "I don't know what to do with this," Sarah admitted. Nora nodded slightly. "You're not supposed to. That's not helpful." "It is," Nora said calmly. "You're trying to turn this into a decision." A pause. "It's not." Sarah looked at her, confused. "Then what is it?" Nora held her gaze. "It's information." That changed something. Because now, it wasn't about choosing him, or rejecting him. It was about understanding something that already existed. Sarah looked back toward Vincent. He hadn't followed her, hadn't interrupted, hadn't inserted himself into the moment. He had simply waited. And for some reason, that mattered. "He's waiting," Nora said quietly. "For what?" Sarah asked. "For you to understand it, without him forcing it on you." A small pause. "Because if he forces it, it becomes something else." That made sense. More than she expected. Sarah exhaled slowly. Her thoughts weren't clear yet, but they were settling. Not into answers, but into something steadier. "I should go back," she said. Nora nodded. "You should." But as Sarah turned, Nora spoke again. "Sarah." She stopped. "You don't have to decide anything tonight." Sarah looked back. Nora's expression was calm, grounded. "Just don't ignore it." Sarah walked back towards the table, not as a waitress, not fully, but not as anything else either. Just herself. And for the first time since this started, she wasn't trying to disappear. Vincent looked up as she approached. Their eyes met again. But this time, it felt different. Less confusion, less distance, still complicated, but clearer. "Sir," she said, her voice steady. Vincent nodded. "Sarah, no extra words, no pressure, because now the moment wasn't about what he knew, it was about what she was beginning to see. And deep inside her, that memory pressed again, closer, sharper, but still not fully there. And when it finally comes, everything changes. The memory didn't arrive gently this time. It came all at once, not as a thought, not as a possibility, but as something undeniable. Sarah stood across from Vincent, her eyes fixed on him, not searching anymore, not questioning, but seeing, really seeing. And suddenly, the room disappeared. The restaurant, the people, the noise, everything faded into something distant as her mind pulled her somewhere else entirely. Rain, cold, heavy, relentless. She was walking fast that night, her arms wrapped tightly around herself, her steps quick, focused on getting home before the rain soaked through everything. She almost didn't stop. That was the part that hit her the hardest. She almost kept walking. But something, a sound, a movement. She had turned, and there he was, on the ground, barely conscious, blood mixing with rainwater, spreading across the pavement in a way that should have made her afraid. But it didn't. Not enough to leave. Hey, can you hear me?" Her voice, younger, uncertain, but still present. Back in the present. Her breath caught. Her hand trembled slightly at her side. "You," she whispered. It wasn't confusion anymore. It wasn't doubt. It was recognition. Vincent didn't move, didn't interrupt. He simply watched her. Because this moment, this exact moment, belonged to her. "You were—" she swallowed, her voice barely steady. "You were bleeding." A small step forward. "You couldn't even stand." Her eyes searched his face again, this time not looking for answers, but confirming what she already knew. "And her voice broke slightly. "I stayed." Vincent nodded once. "You stayed." The memory kept unfolding. Not because he told it, but because she was finally letting herself see it. She remembered dragging him slightly, her hands shaking, her mind racing through what to do, what not to do, what mattered most in that moment. She remembered not asking questions, not asking who he was, not asking why he was there, just helping. "Why didn't I recognize you?" she asked suddenly. The question came out sharper than she intended, more emotional, more personal. Vincent answered without hesitation, "Because I made sure you wouldn't." Silence, heavy, unavoidable. Sarah's brows pulled together. "What does that mean?" Vincent held her gaze. "It means I removed myself from your memory." The words didn't land immediately. They hovered. Unreal. Almost impossible. "That's not possible," she said. "It is." "No, it's not." Her voice rose slightly now, not in anger, but in disbelief. "You can't just decide whether someone remembers you or not." Vincent didn't react to the tone, because he expected it. "I didn't erase the night," he said calmly. "Just me." Sarah took a step back, because now, this wasn't just emotional. This was something else, something she couldn't immediately place. "How?" she asked. One word, but it carried everything. Vincent paused, not because he didn't have an answer, but because of what the answer would do. "I gave you a choice," he said. Sarah frowned. "I don't remember choosing anything." "You wouldn't." That didn't help. "If you don't explain this properly, I'm walking away," she said. Her voice was firm now, grounded, and for the first time since the memory returned. There was distance again. Vincent nodded slowly. After you helped me. You stayed until I was stable. A pause. You waited longer than you needed to. Sarah didn't interrupt, because now she was listening again. When I regained consciousness, he continued, you asked me one question. Her eyes narrowed slightly. What question? Vincent's voice softened. Are you safe now? The simplicity of it hit harder than anything else, because it sounded like her, felt like her. And when I said yes, Vincent added quietly, you stood up to leave. Sarah's chest tightened, because that part felt real. You didn't ask for my name, he said. You didn't wait for anything. A pause. You were ready to forget me the moment you knew I would live. Her breath slowed, not because she was calm, but because something inside her was aligning. So what does that have to do with my memory? She asked. Vincent met her gaze. I asked you something before you left. Her expression shifted. What? I asked if you wanted to remember this. That stopped her, completely. And you said no. The silence that followed was different. It wasn't confusion, it wasn't tension, it was something deeper, something heavier. I wouldn't say that, she whispered. You did. No, I wouldn't. Her voice shook slightly now. That's not me. Vincent didn't argue. He simply said, you said you didn't want to carry anything that would change how you saw people. Her lips parted slightly. Because now, that sounded like her. Too much like her. You said if you remembered me. He continued, you might start looking at people differently. A pause. Like everyone had something hidden. Her eyes softened. Because that was something she would say. So I gave you what you asked for. Vincent said. I stepped out of the memory. Sarah's mind struggled to hold it all at once. The memory, the explanation, the weight of it. So everything after that, she said slowly. The rent, the hospital, the visa. Vincent nodded. I didn't step into your life. A pause. I just removed the things that would have broken it. Her chest tightened, not because of what he did, but because of what it meant. You've been there this whole time, she said quietly, without being there. Yes. She looked at him again, really looked, and for the first time, she saw it. Not power, not control, not even intention. Care, but not the kind she understood. Why now? She asked. Why show me this now? Vincent didn't answer immediately. Because this was the part that changed everything. Because you were about to lose something, he said. Her brows pulled together. What? Vincent reached into his jacket, slowly, deliberately, and placed something on the table between them. A letter. Worn. Folded. Unopened. Sarah looked at it, confusion returning. What is this? Vincent didn't touch it again. It arrived 2 days ago. Her heart skipped slightly, because something about it, something about the way he said that, didn't feel small. From who? She asked. Vincent held her gaze, and for the first time, there was no control in his expression, no calm, no certainty. Just something, uncertain. You should read it, he said. Sarah hesitated, then slowly reached for it, her fingers brushing against the edge. Something about the weight of it felt wrong, not physically, emotionally. She unfolded it, carefully. Her eyes scanned the first line. And then everything stopped. Her hand froze. Her breathing changed. Her expression shifted in a way that couldn't be hidden. No, she whispered. Vincent didn't speak. Because now, this wasn't his moment anymore. This was hers. And whatever she had just read, it changed everything. The room came back slowly. The noise, the people, the world. But Sarah didn't move, didn't speak, didn't even blink. Because now, the story she thought she understood was no longer complete. And Vincent? He had just become the least complicated part of it. What did she see in that letter? Who sent it? And why did it shake her more than everything Vincent just revealed? Because whatever is in that letter is not about the past. It's about something that's been waiting for her, this entire time. So now the question is, if you were Sarah, would you trust Vincent after everything you've just learned? Or would that letter change everything for you? And what do you think part 2 is really about? Love, or something much deeper? If you want to find out what happens next, make sure you subscribe, share this story with someone who needs to experience it, and turn on your notification bell so you don't miss part 2. Because the next part, it's not just a continuation, it's a revelation. Some stories don't end, they just uncover what was always there.